The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse as Alexander Hayes sat motionless in his wheelchair, watching his girlfriend of 18 months, Vivian, apply her makeup with the mechanical precision of someone going through the motions of caring. 3 weeks had passed since he'd told her about his accident, a fabricated skiing mishap that had supposedly left him paralyzed from the waist down, and already the cracks in their relationship were showing like fault lines in expensive marble. At 35, Alexander had everything money could buy. A tech empire worth $300 million, properties on 4 continents, and a collection of luxury cars he could no longer pretend to drive. What he'd never had was certainty about whether someone could love him for who he was rather than what he owned. The elaborate deception had seemed brilliant when his therapist suggested he needed to know if Vivian truly cared for him. But now, trapped in his own lie, Alexander was discovering truths he'd never wanted to face. "I have lunch with the Rothschilds today," Vivian announced without turning around, her voice carrying the detached politeness she'd adopted since his supposed accident. "I've arranged for that new maid, what's her name, Rosa, to stay with you." Alexander nodded silently, though Vivian wasn't looking. Rosa Martinez had been working in his home for only 2 weeks, hired through an agency after his previous housekeeper retired. She was quiet, efficient, and treated his supposed disability with a matter-of-fact kindness that somehow felt more genuine than Vivian's increasingly forced cheerfulness. "Take care, darling," Vivian said, kissing the air near his cheek before clicking away on heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Moments later, Rosa appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the modest uniform of someone who understood her place in the world. She was perhaps 28, with gentle eyes that held depths Alexander was only beginning to recognize, and calloused hands that spoke of a life built on honest work rather than inherited privilege. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said in lightly accented English, her voice warm despite the formal distance she maintained. "I've prepared your breakfast. Would you like to eat in the dining room or here by the window?" "Here is fine," Alexander replied, struck as always by how Rosa looked directly at him when she spoke, not with the mixture of pity and discomfort he'd grown used to from others, including Vivian. As Rosa arranged his breakfast on the small table beside his chair, Alexander found himself studying her movements. There was grace in the way she worked, a quiet dignity that commanded more respect than any of Vivian's designer outfits ever had. More importantly, she talked to him like he was still a person, not a tragic figure to be managed and endured. "My nephew, Luis, is learning to code," Rosa mentioned as she poured his coffee. "He's 12 and already building websites. I told him about your company, how you started with just an idea and built something amazing. He looks up to people like you." Alexander felt something twist in his chest. "People like me?" Rosa paused in her work, meeting his eyes with surprising directness. "People who create things, who make life better for others. Luis dreams of building apps that help people, like the translation program your company made for immigrants. It helped my sister learn English when she first came here." The irony hit Alexander like a physical blow. Here he was, pretending to be something he wasn't to test someone's love, while Rosa saw him as an inspiration for her nephew's dreams. The weight of his deception felt heavier than any wheelchair. Over the following days, as Vivian's visits became shorter and less frequent, Alexander found himself looking forward to his conversations with Rosa. She told him about her family, parents who cleaned office buildings at night so their children could attend college, a sister studying nursing, a brother who'd opened a small restaurant with dreams of expansion. Her world was built on hope and hard work, a stark contrast to the entitled circles Alexander had always moved in. "You seem sad today," Rosa observed one afternoon as she helped him with his physical therapy exercises, movements he didn't need but couldn't abandon without revealing his lie. Alexander looked at her. This woman who noticed his moods when his own girlfriend barely glanced his way anymore. "Rosa, can I ask you something personal?" She nodded, continuing to guide his supposedly numb leg through the prescribed motions. "What would you do if someone you cared about wasn't who you thought they were? If they'd been lying to you?" Rosa's hand stilled for a moment. I suppose it would depend on why they were lying. Were they trying to hurt someone, or were they scared? Scared? Sometimes people lie because they're afraid of being rejected for who they really are. That's different from lying to take advantage of someone. She resumed the therapy, her touch gentle but firm. I think the real question is, once you know the truth, can you forgive them? And can they forgive themselves? That evening, Alexander sat alone in his study, a room Vivian rarely entered anymore, staring at the framed photo on his desk. It showed him and Vivian at a charity gala, both of them smiling perfect smiles for the cameras. They looked like they belonged together. Two beautiful people from the same glittering world. But the image felt hollow now, a performance captured in silver and glass. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Staying at Mother's tonight. Rosa can handle dinner. No explanation, no apology, just the casual dismissal of someone whose inconvenient reality had become too much trouble to manage. Alexander realized with crystalline clarity that Vivian had already checked out of their relationship. She was just too polite or perhaps too interested in his money to make it official. The sound of gentle footsteps made him look up to find Rosa in the doorway, holding a dinner tray. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Hayes. You missed dinner, and I thought you might be hungry. As she set the tray on his desk, Alexander caught the scent of her perfume, something simple and clean, unlike Vivian's expensive French fragrances that seemed designed to announce her presence from across a room. Rosa, he said impulsively, would you sit with me while I eat? I could use the company. She hesitated, clearly aware of the boundaries between employer and employee, but something in his voice must have convinced her. She pulled up a chair, folding her hands in her lap with that quiet composure he'd come to admire. Can I tell you something? Alexander asked, setting down his fork. Something I've never told anyone? Rosa nodded, her dark eyes focused entirely on him. I'm afraid, he said simply. I'm afraid that no one will ever love me for who I am instead of what I have. I'm afraid that I'm not worth loving without all the money and success and things that make me seem important. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Hayes, I've worked for many wealthy people. Some were kind, some were cruel, some were just empty. But you ask about my family. You remember that Luis wants to be a programmer. When I mentioned my sister needed help finding a job, you quietly made sure she heard about an opening at one of your companies. Alexander stared at her, surprised. How did you know that was me? Because you're the kind of man who helps people without needing credit for it. That has nothing to do with your money, Mr. Hayes. That's who you are. 2 months later, Alexander actually stood in the same study, watching through the window as Vivian's lawyer carried the last of her belongings to a waiting car. The breakup had been swift and predictable once he'd revealed his deception. Vivian's anger had been real, but underneath it, Alexander had seen something that looked almost like relief. Behind him, Rosa entered quietly, as she always did, carrying fresh flowers for his desk. She knew his secret now, had known for weeks, actually, having caught him walking late one night when he thought everyone was asleep. But instead of anger or betrayal, she'd simply said, I understand why you needed to know. Rosa, he said, turning to face her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. She nodded, setting the vase of daisies, her choice, simple and beautiful, on his desk. When you look at me now, knowing everything, what do you see? Rosa smiled, the first truly radiant smile he'd ever seen from her. I see a man who was so afraid of being alone that he forgot he was never actually alone at all. I see someone who's finally ready to stop testing love and start living it. Alexander reached for her hands. Those capable, gentle hands that had cared for him when he thought he needed caring for, and had seen through his deception to the scared man beneath. Would you be willing to find out what that looks like? He asked. Living love instead of testing it? Rosa's answer came not in words, but in the way she stepped closer, her hands warm in his, her eyes holding all the certainty he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves completely to discover who we really are. And sometimes the love we've been desperately seeking has been quietly caring for us all along, waiting patiently for us to be brave enough to deserve it.